Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we crack open history's most enduring cold cases and really try to figure out what the experts are actually saying.
And today, yeah, we're immersing ourselves in secrets the ancient world has, well, successfully guarded for centuries.
Mhm.
It really springs from that universal human fascination with origins. We're
Right.
just intrinsically curious about what we can't see about what
Mhm.
came before. I think that's the core reason these deep mysteries, continue to captivate us 600 or even 2,000 years later.
Absolutely. So, our mission today is to explore the extremes of ancient secrecy, what we're calling layered complexity. We're going to zoom out, way out, to the vast, massive, observable structures etched into the earth, the
hmm
incredible geoglyphs of Peru, and then zoom way into arguably the world's most dense and, well, microscopic puzzle, the Voynich Manuscript.
Yeah, connecting secrets, written on like a continental scale with secrets locked inside a single book. It's quite the
It
contrast.
really is.
And this dive, I think, perfectly showcases the radical evolution of how we approach these historical enigmas. Back in the 19th century, archaeologists relied on incredibly physical methods.
Right, the pickaxe and shovel approach.
Exactly, a pickaxe, a shovel, a wheelbarrow.
Mm.
Now, contrast that with modern practice. If a present-day archaeologist finds a tiny, like really unassuming clay pellet, they might use an atomic reactor.
An atomic reactor.
Right,
Serious.
or advanced spectrometry, yeah, just to deduce its precise chemical and elemental compositions, a whole different world.
That sets the stage perfectly for this contrast, then. Whether we're looking at massive lines scraped into the Peruvian desert floor or, intricate iron gull ink lines on 15th century calfskin, we're applying the most cutting-edge 21st century science to understand these deeply held 15th century or even BC intentions.
That's the goal.
Okay, let's start big, geographically massive, with the geoglyphs of Peru. Okay, so let's unpack this, maybe starting with the Nazca lines first. You're talking about a pre-Inca civilization etching, over 1,000 designs into the dry coastal plain of Peru.
Yeah, the area known as the Pampa Colorada, and this was roughly 2,000 years ago. But how they did it is fascinatingly simple and complex at the same time.
How so? Simple and complex.
Well, it's simple in that the Nazca lines aren't like deep trenches or carved depressions.
Okay.
They were created basically by clearing away the reddish-brown iron oxide-coated rocks that cover the desert surface, those dark pebbles.
Ah, right.
Once those dark rocks are removed, the lighter, sort of whitish earth underneath is exposed. And that contrast creates the image.
And because the climate there is so stable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because the area sees virtually no wind and minimal rain, these lines have remained, pretty much perfectly preserved for 2 millennia. It's incredible.
What's also incredible is that despite their sheer size, I mean, you mentioned some lines stretch up to 30 miles.
30 miles, yeah.
They remained largely unknown to the modern world until aircraft began flying over the area in the 1930s. How is that even possible?
Well, the human eye, standing on the desert floor, simply cannot perceive the full pattern. You might see a line, but not the whole figure.
Ah, you're too close.
Exactly. They're the ultimate example, maybe, of a design created for a celestial viewer, or perhaps for the gods themselves. Only from an aerial perspective does the full breadth become visible.
And the breadth is staggering. We're not just talking about huge geometric shapes like trapezoids and spirals.
No, not at all.
But also incredibly specific, detailed figures of animals and plants.
Yeah, the complexity suggests a highly coordinated effort. They depict figures like the spider, which is, a quarter-mile long?
Quarter-mile spider, yeah.
The hummingbird, a dog, the famous monkey, the whale, a two-headed snake, and that humanoid figure nicknamed the astronaut.
The astronaut, right? Always sparks those wild theories.
It does. But what really stands out here is the level of precision in scaling these complex, organic forms up to such a massive size without visible flaws. That takes planning.
And these discoveries are ongoing, which highlights how much we still don't know. I think our sources mentioned, 168 new geoglyphs discovered just in 2022?
That's a crucial point.
Or
Modern tools like drones and photogrammetry techniques allow archaeologists to find lines that are far fainter, much more eroded than the famous ones.
oh, okay.
So the 2022 finds often included smaller, more localized figures, maybe different styles. This keeps the archaeological conversation vibrant and reminds us that, Nazca is still actively revealing its secrets.
So, okay, we know what they are broadly. We know how they were built clearing rocks and how old they are. About 2,000 years.
Roughly, yes.
But the enduring mystery, the one that keeps researchers, guessing is the purpose. What was the driving intention behind this massive artistic and, frankly, engineering project?
That's the million-dollar question. The most prominent hypothesis, championed by figures like Maria Reicha, who devoted decades, her whole life really, to studying the lines, associates them with water rituals and irrigation, which, makes perfect sense given the environment. It's an arid, high desert area.
Water would be everything.
Absolutely. Water was the ultimate resource. And the lines, particularly those massive trapezoidal shapes, often seem to point toward mountain runoff channels or maybe subterranean water sources.
I can see the logic there, creating these massive offerings or maybe indicators directed at the mountain gods, hoping to ensure water flow. But how do the animal figures fit into that? The monkey, the spider?
Well, some animals are clearly associated with water. The whale, for instance, obvious link.
Okay.
Others, like the spider, might relate to seasonal predictions, maybe fertility cycles associated with specific celestial events that signal rain. But, the connection is sometimes tenuous. It can feel like a stretch.
Right.
And this is why other guesses abound, as our sources put it. You have theories suggesting they were astronomical observatories.
Like Stonehenge, but flat.
Kind of, yeah. Though many of the lines don't perfectly align with significant astronomical markers, so that theory has holes. You even have proposals that they're a part of, like a giant kinetic labyrinth people walk through.
Wow. Okay, so lots of ideas, no firm answers.
Pretty much.
If we connect this back to our theme of layered complexity, the Nazca lines are complex not because of the materials used, obviously,
No, very simple materials.
but because of the sheer scale and the intention that remains obscured from us, even though the lines themselves are right there.
Precisely. The simplicity of construction hides the complexity of meaning. It's right there, but we can't grasp it.
Now, just a bit northwest of Nazca, we find a related but equally mysterious structure. It seems to challenge even the navigational theories proposed for Nazca, the Paracas candelabra.
Ah, yes, the candelabra. This is a spectacular structure, a massive geoglyph carved into a steep hillside overlooking Peru's Pisco Bay.
How massive are we talking?
It stretches some 600 feet from top to bottom.
600 feet.
Yeah. It's impossible to ignore if you sail past it. Huge.
Wow. To put that in perspective, that's taller than a 60-story building lying on its side, just carved into a hill.
Exactly. But its dating is even fuzzier than Nazca's.
Oh, why is that?
Well, pottery found nearby dates to around 200 BC, which places it in the Paracas culture, who actually preceded the Nazca people.
Okay, so older, maybe?
Potentially older culture, yeah. But we cannot definitively date the carving itself. It's an erosional environment, the hillside, and we don't have any organic material within the carving to use carbon dating on.
Ah, right. No bits of wood or charcoal mixed in the carving itself.
Exactly. So we have a date range defined by nearby cultural artifacts, but the exact age of the candelabra itself remains unknown. Could be Paracas, could be later.
So another mystery layer. What are the primary sort of conflicting theories about its purpose then?
They're essentially polarized between the practical and the divine, which is common with these things. On one hand, there's the navigational theory.
Makes sense overlooking the bay.
Right. Given its massive scale and proximity to the coastline, it could have served as an invaluable, unmissable marker for sailors approaching the coast, helping them navigate the frequently fog-bound waters of Pisco Bay.
Like a giant permanent lighthouse without the light.
Exactly. A landmark visible for miles out at sea.
Okay, that's the practical side. And the alternative.
The alternative claims that it depicts the creator god's trident or maybe a staff. Viracocha's trident is often mentioned.
Ah, connecting it to mythology.
Yes, linking it directly into Paracas belief systems and cosmology. If this is true, its function is purely spiritual, a massive dedication or symbol of power facing the ocean.
So a technical map versus a religious symbol.
That tension.
Yeah.
Yeah. Often found in these ancient layered mysteries. We want a practical answer, but maybe it was something else entirely.
What stands out to me here is how the geoglyphs, both Nazca and Paracas, in their sheer enormity, managed to keep their secrets hidden in plain sight. You can see them, you can touch them, you can measure them. But you still can't quite grasp the central motive, the why behind their creation.
And that, I think, prepares us perfectly for our next topic, where the scale flips completely. We move from the secrets of the landscape to the secrets locked inside a single, dense, and incredibly baffling codex.
Okay, so we've gone from sprawling open-air art to the world's most mysterious book, the Voynich Manuscript, or VM, as the researchers call it.
That's right.
And this isn't just a dense puzzle in terms of content. You're saying it's a complete codicological puzzle, meaning the book's physical structure and history are part of the mystery, too.
It truly is a remarkable object in itself, yeah.
Yeah.
This is a 15th century codex created on vellum that's prepared calfskin, high-quality stuff for the time.
Okay.
Physically, it measures about 23.5 centimeters by 16.2 centimeters by 5 centimeters, so roughly 9 by 6 inches, a couple of inches thick. But importantly, it's incomplete.
Missing pages.
Yeah. It currently holds 240 pages, or folios,
Right.
out of a likely original 272. These pages were originally gathered into quires,
Yeah.
folded sections sewn together.
Right, like signatures in modern bookbinding.
Exactly. And we only have 18 out of a possible original 20 quires remaining, so entire sections are just gone.
And the numbering of those pages, you said it tells a messy history, like someone's messed with the order.
Yes, exactly. The quires themselves are numbered 1 to 20, using a style of numeral that's consistent with the 15th century. So that seems original.
Okay.
But then if you look at the top right-hand corner of the recto pages, that's the right-hand page when the book is open, you find later numbering 1 to 116.
Wait, 1 to 116, but there are 240 pages? That doesn't match up at all.
Doesn't match up. And this discrepancy, coupled with the missing pages and some weirdness in how the bifolios, the folded sheets, are arranged, suggests strong evidence that pages and entire sections were reordered at various points in its history.
So someone, somewhere, took this book apart and put it back together, possibly incorrectly.
Or maybe intentionally reordered it for some reason we don't understand. But yeah, dismantled and reassembled. It's not in its original 15th century sequence.
Wow. It sounds like historians are still basically trying to figure out what the original intended architecture of the text was supposed to be before it got shuffled like a deck of cards.
That's a big part of the research, absolutely. Even the cover isn't original.
Right, you mentioned that. The current one is later.
That's correct. The current plain gold skin binding dates to its time at the Collegio Romano, that Jesuit institution in Rome, probably 17th or 18th century.
But there's evidence of an earlier one.
Yeah, tiny little clues. Insect holes found on the very first and very last folios, the vellum would have rested right against the covers.
Uh-huh.
Those patterns suggest that it had a prior wooden cover, common in the 15th century. This tiny detail helps narrow the historical timeline of its binding changes. Someone replaced the wood with leather later on.
Okay, let's talk about the materiality of the text itself. This is where that modern high-tech analysis meets 15th century scribal craft you mentioned earlier. What does forensic analysis tell us about the inks and pigments used?
So the primary script and the outlines of all those weird figures were created using a quill pen and iron gall ink.
Standard medieval stuff.
Pretty standard, yeah. It's a classic medieval ink made from iron salts and tannic acids, often derived from oak galls, those growths on oak trees.
And we know this how? Not just by looking.
Definitely not just by looking. Modern analysis confirms it. They used energy dispersive X-ray spectroscopy, or EDS analysis.
Okay, EDS. For our listeners who aren't in a lab, can you quickly break down what that actually does? How does it identify ink?
Sure. Think of it like a chemical fingerprinting system, but non-destructive. You basically bombard a tiny spot on the ink sample with X-rays.
Okay.
The elements inside that ink sample, like iron or sulfur or calcium, they react by emitting their own unique secondary X-rays, like little energy signatures.
Ah, like each element has its own ping sound.
Kind of, yeah. By reading the energy signature of those emitted X-rays, the machine can tell you the precise elemental composition of the ink. In this case, EDS showed major amounts of carbon, iron, sulfur, potassium, and calcium in those ink samples. Confirms iron gall. Okay, so that confirms the ink type. And there was another type of analysis, XRD. Yes, X-ray diffraction, or XRD. This looks at the crystal structure of the components, not just the elements. And this is fascinating because it identified a specific compound, potassium light oxide, in a tested sample.
What's significant about that?
What's really significant is the similarity they found between the elemental composition of the ink used for the drawing outlines and the ink used for the text itself.
Ah, so drawing ink equals text ink.
Pretty much suggests a contemporaneous origin. That means the figures were likely drawn around the same time the text was written.
Okay, that's important. It counters any theory that, say, someone added the text to pre-existing illustrations much later or the other way around.
Exactly. It implies the whole page, text, and drawings was conceived together.
But didn't you say the colors might be later? The filling in part?
That's the current thinking, yes. The somewhat crude color used to paint inside the outlines of the figures was likely added after the text and the outlines were done.
So like a two-stage process.
It suggests that, yeah, Maybe the primary scribe created the text and the line drawings, and then a secondary person or maybe a group later colored the illustrations in. The coloring technique seems a bit less sophisticated than the drawing itself.
Okay, this is already incredibly layered. Now, the provenance, the history of ownership. This is where it gets really adventurous, right? We know it was rediscovered by the book dealer Wilfrid Voynich in 1912. That's where the name comes from.
Yes, he found it in a Jesuit college outside Rome.
But where does the historical paper trail lead back before him?
Well, the most famous claimed prior owner, the one that really establishes its importance and mystery early on, was Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II in Prague. This would be around the late 16th century.
Rudolph II, the Habsburg emperor obsessed with alchemy and the occult?
The very same. And the story goes, he supposedly paid a massive 600 gold ducats for the book.
600 ducats. Okay, back in the 1580s. What does that actually represent in buying power? Is that a lot?
It was an astronomical sum. I mean, a skilled worker, a craftsman, might earn maybe 50 to 100 ducats per year.
Per year. So 600 ducats is like 6 to 12 years' wages for a skilled worker.
Easily. Enough to buy several sizable properties or fund a scholar for many, many years. The fact that someone, especially an emperor known for collecting arcane objects, supposedly paid that much for a book they couldn't read.
Yeah, that tells you something.
It speaks volumes about the awe, the intrigue, and maybe the perceived commercial value attached to the manuscript even back then. Someone thought it held immense secrets.
It was also stored for a long period at the Collegio Romano, the famous Jesuit college in Rome, wasn't it?
That's right. We know this for sure because it bears the ex libris, the book plate inscription of Petrus Bex. He was the head of the Jesuit order and the university's rector in the mid-19th century.
And it almost didn't survive.
It was a close call. It was only hastily saved from confiscation in 1870 when the new Italian government annexed the Papal States and started seizing church properties, including libraries.
Wow.
This hurried, dramatic rescue, where the Jesuits apparently moved valuable books to private villas to hide them, that likely preserved the manuscript intact. Otherwise, it might have been lost or dispersed.
And we have evidence of even earlier attempts to understand it centuries before Voynich stumbled upon it.
We do. We have letters showing that copies of some manuscript pages were made way back in 1637 by a Bohemian alchemist named Georg Beresch.
Okay.
And he sent these copies to the renowned Jesuit scholar in Rome, Athanasius Kircher. Kircher was famous for trying to decipher Egyptian hieroglyphs, though he wasn't always successful.
So Beresch was hoping Kircher could crack this code too.
Exactly. Beresch basically kicked off the scholarly fascination with decipherment that continues right up to this day. And Kircher, this great 17th century polymath, was the first major scholar we know of to try and fail to crack the Voynich code.
Sets a precedent, doesn't it? Okay, now for the content itself. The drawings are what truly give the VM its fame and, well, its structure, right? Experts split the codex into 6 major sections based on the illustration content.
Yeah, let's walk through them quickly because the images are absolutely vital to any attempt at decipherment. First, you've got the botanicals. This is the largest section.
Plants.
Plants. About 113 distinct species illustrated. But here's the kicker. They are overwhelmingly unidentified. They just don't clearly match known flora from anywhere in the world. Weird composite plants sometimes.
Weird plants. Then we move into the celestial sphere.
Right. The astronomical, astrological section. This features charts with radiating circles, suns, moons, stars, and clearly identifiable zodiac symbols like Pisces, Taurus, Sagittarius. You can recognize those.
Standard astrological stuff then.
Up to a point. But here's where the Voynich oddness really kicks in. These charts are often accompanied by miniature nude females.
Nude female.
Yeah, dozens of them, often shown emerging from pipes or chimneys connected to the celestial diagrams.
Pipes and chimneys. Connected to zodiac signs. That seems like an utterly bizarre blend of, I don't know, celestial mechanics and Renaissance plumbing art.
It is bizarre. And it gets maybe even stranger in the next section, the biological section. This is arguably the most challenging to interpret.
What's in there?
Again, miniature female nudes. Lots of them.
Okay.
Many shown with swelled abdomen suggesting maybe pregnancy or perhaps illness like edema.
Okay.
And they're shown immersed or wading in these pools or baths filled with green or sometimes blue fluids. And crucially, they seem to be interacting with these complex networks of interconnecting tubes and capsules, it looks like.
Mm-hmm.
Well, like a hybrid of plumbing diagrams and communal bathing scenes. Very strange.
Biological plumbing.
Okay.
Then we have the cosmological section, which attempts to map something vast.
Yep. That contains an elaborate array of 9 cosmological medallions. These are often drawn across huge folded folios Think of them as massive fold-out centerfolds or maps depicting possible geographical forms or maybe celestial mechanisms or even microscopic views. It's unclear. This section includes the famous Rosette's page, that 9-circle diagram.
Got it. And fifth, back to plants.
Back to something more practical looking, yeah. The pharmaceutical section returns to application. It has drawings of over 100 medicinal herbs and roots, but this time they're often portrayed alongside colored jars or vessels, red, blue, or green containers.
Suggesting preparations, like this root goes in the blue jar.
Exactly. It looks like instructions for making herbal remedies or compounds.
Okay. And finally, the last segment.
The continuous text section. This is basically pages filled mostly with just script, very few drawings, possibly recipes or maybe detailed explanations of the previous sections. The paragraphs or entries are sometimes marked in the margins by little star-like flowers, almost like bullet points or index markers.
Okay, 6 distinct sections, mostly defined by these incredibly strange illustrations. Let's circle back to the interpretation of this imagery. The running theories you mentioned tend to connect the imagery, particularly the biological and botanical sections, to women's health.
That hypothesis has immense traction, yes. The constant images of bathing women, the focus on herbal remedies, it led researchers pretty early on to strongly interpret the VM as potentially a women's health manual.
Specifically gynecological?
Gynecological, or maybe covering the whole life cycle, reproduction, childcare, general female health. It fits some of the imagery quite well.
And the bathing. Why so much bathing?
Well, in the medieval and Renaissance periods, physicians, especially those dealing with female patients, often prescribed therapeutic baths, balneotherapy, as cure-alls for all sorts of ailments.
Ah, right. Like take a bath with these herbs.
Exactly. And the focus on reproduction and maybe parenting, suggested by those figures with the swelled abdomens in the biological section, further supports this idea of it being a health guide for women.
Okay, if the book is essentially a 15th century holistic health guide, maybe quite advanced for its time, that could also solve the puzzle of why we see those elaborate astrological charts, right?
Yeah.
Why mix stars with herbs?
Precisely. That connection is key. Medieval doctors, and this practice goes way back, well beyond the 15th century, firmly believed that cures worked better or were safer if they were gathered or administered under specific astrological signs.
Timing was everything.
Timing was critical. They relied on planetary positions to determine auspicious times for harvesting herbs, for preparing medicines, or for performing treatments, even bloodletting. The zodiac charts weren't just decorative. They were likely a necessary diagnostic and scheduling component of any comprehensive medieval health manual.
So the 6 sections might actually represent a logically sequenced medical text, just encrypted in some bizarre way and illustrated in a unique, maybe symbolic style.
That makes a lot of sense, yeah. It provides a vital context.
Yeah.
The pictures inform the likely subject matter, and the subject matter, in turn, informs the type of language or cipher we should be looking for. We're likely looking for medical terms, plant names, procedural instruction.
Right. But it still doesn't tell us what the language is or how the code works.
No. That's the next massive layer of complexity.
Yeah.
The text itself. Voyniches.
Okay, so the text itself, what researchers call Voyniches. This is the definitive barrier, isn't it? And it raises that core, almost binary debate. Is the text meaningful, a real language? Or a cipher hiding a real language? Or is it just a meaningless hoax? Elaborate gibberish produced to trick someone like Rudolph II.
Exactly. And for decades, that hoax theory held significant weight. Critics argued, that the symbols were too repetitive, the words seemed too short and structurally simple, and the overall structure felt too orderly, maybe too regular for a natural language.
Too patterned to be real.
Kind of, yeah. Leading some researchers, like the Austrian Andreas Schinner back in 2007, to suggest that the text was just meaningless gibberish produced by quasi-stochastic methods like using tables or grills to generate semi-random character strings that looked like text but weren't.
Like a sophisticated doodle.
A very sophisticated one, yeah. But the statistical tools available today, especially in the last decade or so, seem to have pretty decisively rejected that hoax theory.
How so? What did the statistics show?
Well, they show the Voynich text is simply too organized, too structured to be random. A Brazilian and German team published findings in 2013 showing statistical properties, things like word frequency distribution, entropy, that are entirely inconsistent with arbitrary random text. It follows linguistic laws like Zipf's law.
Okay, so it behaves like language statistically.
It does. And even more crucially, Marcelo Montemurro, who's a theoretical physicist applying statistical mechanics to texts, discovered that the Voynich text exhibits semantic networks.
Semantic networks. What exactly does that mean in practical terms, like words relating to each other?
It means the text isn't just a flat string of unrelated words, even if they follow statistical rules. It shows clustered patterns of specific, content-bearing words. So when the subject matter in the illustrations changes, say, you move from a page about plant roots to a page with astronomical diagrams,
Uh-huh.
the word frequency and the specific vocabulary used in the accompanying text immediately shift in a predictable way. Certain words cluster in the botanical section, different words cluster in the astro section.
Ah, so the text tracks the pictures topic-wise.
Exactly. Montemurro argued that this structural sophistication, reflecting clear topic shifts, was too advanced to have been intentionally incorporated into a hoax back in the 15th century. Because the mathematical and linguistic knowledge needed to fake such a sophisticated structure to build in those semantic correlations. It simply didn't exist then. They wouldn't know how.
That's a really compelling point. You couldn't fake that kind of structure before you understood information theory. And modern AI tools back this up.
They do. A 2021 Yale study used TF-IDF analysis. That stands for Term Frequency Inverse Document Frequency. It's a common technique in information retrieval and AI.
How does TF-IDF work if you don't know the language?
Well, basically, it measures how important a word of the Voynich symbol string is to a specific section or document within the whole manuscript, relative to its frequency across all sections. It helps identify keywords for topics.
Okay.
By applying this, the Yale team computed subject clusters purely from the text data. And they concluded that these computed text clusters perfectly matched the topics suggested by the illustrations, botanical words clustered together, astronomical words clustered together, and so on.
So independent computational confirmation.
Exactly. Strong evidence that the Voynich manuscript contains organized, meaningful text related to the images. It's not random.
Okay, so if it's meaningful, but it doesn't look like any known language.
Yeah.
Get back to the structure. You said it seems far more rigid and rule-based than natural languages we know.
That observation leads us to this idea, this architecture metaphor. It comes partly from analyses like autocorrelation function or ACF analysis.
ACF, what does that measure?
ACF analysis measures how much a symbol's appearance depends on the symbols that came immediately before it.
Yeah.
The predictability of symbol sequences.
Okay.
And in Voynich's, the symbols display significant autoregressive behavior.
Give us the breakdown. What does autoregressive behavior look like in language? How is it different from, say, English?
Well, in natural English, while there are certainly rules and patterns, like Q is usually followed by U, the structure is pretty flexible. There's a lot of variation.
Right.
In Voynich's, the ACF analysis implies a very deep, almost algorithmic, rule-based structure. Certain symbols aren't just likely to follow others. They seem almost mandated to follow others in specific positions within a word. It feels less like organic language and more like a constructed system.
Like computer code, almost.
That's maybe too strong.
Yeah.
But it suggests the system has consistent conceptual organization and rigid use structures, as some researchers put it.
So this leads to the idea that we can't just call it a language or just a cipher. It's something hybrid, maybe, more complex.
That seems to be the most productive conceptual framework right now, yeah. To think of Voynich's as a complex blend that might be equal parts cryptography, code, steganography, hidden messages, maybe shorthand, and some underlying language.
Multi-layered system.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And attempting to force it into just one of those single categories, like demanding it, behaves exactly like medieval Latin or exactly like a standard visionary cipher, is probably bound to fail because it might be using elements of all of them.
And you have to remember the context, right? The 15th century.
Precisely. The boundaries between intellectual specializations back then, cryptography, medicine, alchemy, astronomy, linguistics, were far muddier, much more fluid than they are today. People combine disciplines in ways we find unusual now.
Okay, so let's delve into maybe two key mechanisms that might illustrate this complexity. The idea of abbreviation and the possible use of ligatures or compound symbols.
Right. So the primary paradox cryptographically is that Voynich's words often seem to have low information content. If you compare the number of unique symbols in its alphabet to the average length of the words don't seem to carry much unique information each. They seem repetitive.
Which sounds like gibberish initially. How do you resolve that paradox without just calling it a hoax?
Well, one strong theory is that this low information content is actually a result of abbreviation, truncation, or contraction in the plain text. That's the original underlying text before encoding.
So the original message was shortened first.
Yeah, imagine if the original text frequently used abbreviations, like writing prep for preparation or med for medicine, which was common in medieval technical writing.
Okay.
The theory goes that the cryptographers then used a verbose cipher to encode it, meaning they deliberately expanded that one short abbreviation, prep, into a longer string of Voynichese characters during the encoding process.
Ah, so a simple idea is intentionally stretched out into a long code string. Why would they do that?
To confuse anyone trying to crack it. It creates a low-density information system that looks completely unlike natural language, making frequency analysis much harder. It's an intentional obfuscation possibly built right into the encoding system.
Okay, that's clever and devious. And then we have the visual clues in the script itself, like those weird, complex gallows symbols.
Exactly. Those complex symbols, particularly the ones that look like little gallows or pitchforks. The EVA symbols, often transcribed as F, K, T, P, and their variants.
Yeah, those stand out.
They are theorized by some analysts like René Zandbergen and Gabriel Landini to be ligatures,
Ligatures meaning?
meaning compounds, basically. Combinations of simpler, more basic symbols fused together into one complex character.
Why would they do that? Just to look fancy?
Probably for efficiency. If the underlying code was maybe built on combinations of just 2 or 3 very simple symbols, using a ligature like the K symbol, the first gallows character, might be a shorthand way to represent a common 2 or 3 simple sequence with just one pen stroke. Makes writing faster.
Okay, so shorthand built into the cipher. And how do we know they might be compounds, not just single complex letters in the alphabet?
Well, again, the statistical analysis helps. The ACF analysis, for instance, shows that these gallows symbols often display somewhat chaotic or irregular behavior compared to the simpler, more common symbols in Voynichese.
They don't follow the rules as strictly.
They seem less predictable, yeah. This erratic nature supports the idea that they aren't core, fundamental parts of the alphabet, but are maybe used more contextually, perhaps based on the need to shorten an underlying encoded text, a sign of shorthand principles being applied on top of a cipher.
Okay, that's intricate.
And furthermore, we see evidence of other medieval shorthand practices potentially being utilized within the script itself. Take the common Voynich glyph, usually transcribed in the EVA system as Y.
Okay, the Y character.
Depending on its position in a word,
Yeah.
it physically resembles known Latin shorthand symbols from the period. When it appears at the start of a Voynich word, it looks quite similar to a common Latin shorthand symbol for prefixes like com or con.
Uh-huh.
But when the same Y glyph appears at the end of a word, it looks more like the Latin shorthand symbol for the suffix mes.
Whoa, wait. So the same symbol might mean completely different things depending on whether it's at the beginning or end of a word.
That's the hypothesis.
Yeah.
And that's fascinating because it means the symbol changes its phonetic or semantic meaning purely based on its context, its position.
That would make it incredibly hard to decipher using simple substitution.
Extremely hard. And that's why that architecture metaphor is key. The idea that a single symbol could hold multiple meanings based on its location or its function within a word, or maybe even the symbols next to it, that kind of multi-layered thinking was definitely in the air in the 15th century, especially in manuscript encoding traditions.
Okay. Given all this potential organization, the statistics say it's meaningful. It seems to have this complex architecture combining cipher, shorthand, maybe abbreviation. Why have so many claimed decipherments failed so spectacularly? Why can't anyone agree?
Well, paradoxically, it's the sheer complexity and the combination of all these possible layers, multiple potential layers of abbreviation, substitution, maybe transposition, steganography, potentially using multiple base languages or technical vocabularies, that allows for an extraordinary level of selectivity and subjectivity in any decipherment attempt.
Too many variables.
Exactly. If you have enough variables, enough unknowns, and enough ambiguity, you can often twist the text or parts of it to say almost anything you want it to say, especially if you're selective about which pages or lines you translate.
Confirmation bias kicks in hard.
Very hard. Many attempts seem to start with a preconceived theory about the language or the author, and then they find evidence that fits, while maybe ignoring the evidence that doesn't.
Okay, let's review some of the most dramatic, perhaps notorious, yet conflicting decipherment claims that illustrate this exact point. This is kind of the alphabet soup of failed theories. First up, the Czech theory.
Ah, yes. Josef Zlatodiprov, who passed away recently, claimed quite forcefully that the text is written in Old Czech.
Old Czech, okay.
He asserted the author was a specific noblewoman, Elishika from Rauschenberg, and his method involved applying a form of gematria, a clicker key, where certain letters are assigned numerical values. In his system, letters like C, G, L, S all equal the number 3, and so on.
Okay, number letter code. And the claims from that decipherment, they were incredibly specific, right? Delving into family history.
They were almost audaciously specific. His claim translation asserted that the text contains detailed genealogical information, revealing, for instance, that Alicia was born in 1466. It even claimed the text states her mother, Anna Hahowska, was 37 years old at the time, and her father, John II, was 34 when the intercourse occurred in 1465.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's remarkably detailed for a 15th century encrypted manuscript.
Stunningly detailed. But the heavy reliance on a highly specific, complex, and ultimately unverifiable numerical key is the core vulnerability of the claim. It hasn't been replicated or widely accepted.
Okay, contrast that specificity with the Hebrew theory, which used machine learning, right?
Yeah.
AI.
Yeah, Greg Kondrak and Bradley Hauer published a study in 2016 suggesting the Voynich's text was fundamentally jumbled up Hebrew.
They theorized it was encoded using alphagrams, essentially anagrams of Hebrew words, and they used AI algorithms trained on Hebrew texts to find patterns.
So AI points to Hebrew anagrams. Sounds promising.
It sounded promising, but critics immediately pointed out a central, potentially crippling flaw in their methodology.
Which was?
They trained their machine learning algorithm primarily on modern 21st century Hebrew language data.
Not 15th century Hebrew?
Exactly. The language structure, the vocabulary, the common phrases, the spelling conventions of 15th Central European Hebrew would have been significantly different from modern Israeli Hebrew. Using the wrong historical data set could easily lead the AI astray.
Like trying to understand Chaucer using modern English slang dictionaries.
Precisely. And their underlying assumption that the text is based on anagrams is also viewed by many critics as, well, a bit too convenient, as it allows for a lot of liberal interpretation and rearrangement during the translation process.
Okay, another dead end, it seems. Then we also have the Aramaic theory, different Semitic language.
Right. Ahmed Ardous, publishing under the pseudonym Darius, claims the text is actually written in a form of biblical Aramaic. Aramaic is an abjad script, meaning vowels are typically omitted, which adds another layer of ambiguity.
Okay, and his angle.
He argues it must be read right to left, like Aramaic. His claim translations often relate to specific biblical figures like Asenath, Joseph's wife, and Egyptian themes like the Nile Law. He even asserts that one page, Folio 57V, actually lists the project and design rules for the script itself.
The instructions are in the manuscript.
That's the claim. Again, a very dramatic claim, very specific translations, but it has not withstood rigorous cross-examination or found acceptance among established Aramaic scholars or Voynich researchers. The methodology seems objective.
Okay, so check, Hebrew, Aramaic. What about closer to home? We can't forget the recurring claims of deciphering it as some form of abbreviated Latin. That seems to draw scholars in repeatedly.
That's right. It's a recurring theme, probably because Latin was the lingua franca of scholarship in 15th century Europe. Joseph Martin Feely claimed way back in 1943 that the text was highly abbreviated, medieval Latin, using just a simple substitution cipher.
And more recently,
in 2017, Nicholas Gibbs, a historian, made headlines claiming it was idiosyncratically abbreviated Latin, specifically a women's health manual borrowing heavily from standard medieval medical texts, with the Voynich words being abbreviations for Latin terms.
sounds plausible on the surface. What's the critique?
The consistent critique of both the Feely and Gibbs efforts, and others like them, is that they become unacceptably subjective in their readings. When you combine a hypothetical substitution cipher with extreme and idiosyncratic abbreviation, meaning the abbreviations don't necessarily follow standard rules, but are unique to the author, you introduce so many variables, so much wiggle room.
You can make it say anything.
Pretty much. The interpretation often relies on the researcher deciding which Latin word and ambiguous Voynich string might abbreviate, and it starts to feel more like guesswork or Rorschach test than rigorous cryptography or linguistics. Neither claim gains significant traction.
And finally, the most recent and perhaps most rapidly rejected theory, the proto-romance idea.
Ah yes, that caused a stir in 2019. Gerard Cheshire published a paper claiming the manuscript was written in calligraphic proto-romance, a hypothetical precursor language to modern Romance languages like French, Spanish, Italian.
Proto-romance, is that even a widely accepted linguistic category?
Not really, especially not as a single unified written language in the 15th century. That was part of the problem. Cheshire suggested the VM was compiled by Dominican nuns, specifically for Maria of Castile, Queen of Aragon.
Again, very specific claims. How did that go over?
It was a textbook example of a theory that gained brief, intense media attention, but was almost instantly and universally rejected by paleographers, linguists, and medieval historians worldwide. The linguistic arguments were seen as flawed. The historical context was questioned.
And his university backed away.
Yes, Cheshire's own university ultimately had to issue a statement disavowing the research due to widespread concerns about its validity and methodology, highlighting the absolute necessity of rigorous peer review and scholarly consensus in tackling something like the Voynich. You can't just declare it solved based on a novel theory. Hashtag tag fee. Reading the pictures to inform the text.
Okay, so since the text itself is so elusive, and the claimed decipherments are, frankly, all over the map and mostly rejected, researchers often circle back to the visual evidence, right? Hoping the images might serve as a less ambiguous key, maybe a clue to the cipher or the origin. Let's start with what you call the calendar clue.
Right. This focuses on that astronomical astrological section, specifically the zodiac roundel drawings.
The ones with the weird ladies and pipes.
Well, focusing just on the central zodiac symbols themselves, the Pisces, the Taurus, the Sagittarius Archer, and so on, what's visually striking is that they bear a strong resemblance, stylistically, to specific astronomical diagrams found in early 15th century German calendars, particularly from the Alsace region. These date roughly from 1420 to 1430.
Ah, so a specific time and place suggested by the art style, that's a concrete lead.
It is. This geographic and temporal specificity is potentially a huge clue, pointing towards southwestern Germany or that Rhine Valley area in the first half of the 15th century as a possible origin point.
Okay, so what does that tell us about the content of that section and the potential origin of the VM?
Well, it leads to the theory that this section represents a working calendar, possibly starting its year on March 1st, which was common then, and critically because medieval calendars often highlighted local events and saints' days. Researchers has hypothesized that the strange Voynich text labels surrounding the zodiac figures might not be complex astrological data or mysterious codes, but simply names, perhaps abbreviated, related to feast days celebrating local saints important in that specific region.
Like a church calendar, basically, but encrypted.
Essentially, yeah.
Hmm.
A regional liturgical calendar hidden in plain sight next to the zodiac signs.
Can you give us a detailed example of how that theory works in practice? Or tries to work?
Sure. Let's look at the December page, which contains the figure of Sagittarius, usually depicted as a crossbowman in these German calendars.
Okay, December.
If this calendar is locally informed, we would expect the text labels around Sagittarius to potentially refer to saints whose feast days fall in early December in that German region. A major one is St. Nicholas. His day is December 6th.
Right, St. Nick.
And he's neatly sandwiched between St. Barbara, December 4th, and the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, December 8th. So if the text were a mnemonic, a memory aid using initials or syllables, we might look for a sequence of Voynich characters around the Sagittarius figure that somehow maps to something like Barba Nikokon or similar.
Representing Barbara Nicholas, Conception.
Yeah.
And does it work? Do we find Barbani Kokon in Voyniches?
And that's the persistent frustration. No. Attempts to fit a clear, unambiguous mnemonic text sequence like that consistently fail. We just don't find anything that obviously matches the known sequence of saints' days in the Voynich labels on the December page or any other page.
So the pictures look right, but the text doesn't confirm it.
Exactly. The visual resemblance to the Alsace calendars is strong, tantalizingly strong, but the textual confirmation, the linguistic link, remains elusive. Another dead end so far.
This raises a really important general question about iconography and interpretation in the VM. When is an object drawn in the manuscript meant to be a literal tool or plant, and when is it purely a metaphor or a symbol? You mentioned the spindle, or maybe it's the spinning top shown on folio 80R.
Yeah, that's a great example of the ambiguity. The object drawn on folio 80R clearly takes the physical form of a spindle, an object used for spinning thread. So we have to contrast interpretations.
Option 1, it's literal.
Option 1, is it a literal tool being used in some kind of chemical or pharmaceutical process described in the text nearby? Maybe something needs to be spun or mixed.
Option 2, it's symbolic.
Option 2, or is it a purely metaphorical device? Some interpretations have linked the spindle symbol to the constellation Virgo, sometimes associated with weaving. Or perhaps it refers allegorically to a particular saint who was a patron of weavers, like St. Catherine, often depicted with a wheel. The interpretation drastically changes the context of the entire page.
And it seems absolutely crucial here to avoid applying purely modern or even purely European assumptions to these images, right? The icon might not be what it first seems to a 21st century eye looking at a 15th century book.
Absolutely critical. The challenge is immense because we simply cannot assume that the drawing wasn't meant for, say, a non-European audience or tradition, or that the symbols, even ones that look familiar like a spindle or a castle, don't represent something deeply metaphorical, alchemical, or religious within a specific lost context.
Or maybe the story isn't the object itself, but the sequence.
That's another view, yeah. Some researchers argue that the sequence of pictures itself tells the story. It's not just that the spindle is there, but that the way the spindle seems to be filling up across a sequence of drawings describes a process, perhaps about dying thread, or a specific chemical reaction that involves gradual accumulation or transformation that requires agitation like spinning.
Okay, layers upon layers of possible meaning just in one drawing. Finally, let's look at that really complex cosmological section, specifically the famous rosettes page, that huge fold-out with the 9 circles.
Ah, yes, the 9 rosette foldout, Folio 86V, possibly the most complex single composition in the manuscript.
What does later codicological analysis looking at the page structure itself suggest about that incredibly complicated drawing? Was it all done at once?
This is one of the areas where looking at the physical object yields clues. There is compelling evidence, based on ink differences and how the drawing interacts with the page folds and repairs, that the complex, almost maze-like network of pipework and connecting tubes surrounding the central rosette was actually added later.
Added later by a different person.
Possibly by a different hand, or at least at a different time. It seems to form a separate codicological layer.
Why add all that complicated pipework?
Good question. One theory is that this elaborate pipework is either just decorative embellishment, added later to make it look more impressive or mysterious, or, more intriguingly, maybe it was added as an intentional distraction or obfuscation layer.
To hide the original meaning.
Potentially. Analysis by researchers like Lisa Fagan-Davis suggests that perhaps only 5 distinct circles within the northwestern rosette, one of the 9, might have held the actual original intended meaning. The rest, especially the pipes, could be noise added on top.
Okay, if the elaborate pipes are maybe just noise or a later addition, what might the original, perhaps simpler rosette diagram have represented?
Well, peeling back that layer leads to other theories. One fascinating geological theory suggests the rosette, or parts of it, might depict a recognizable geographical feature.
Like a map.
Kind of. Specifically, some researchers have proposed it might represent a specific type of volcano, or perhaps a unique grouping of mud volcanoes.
Mud volcanoes, where would that point to?
Well, there are notable mud volcano fields in areas like the Alboran Sea, between Spain and Morocco, or perhaps near the Atlas Mountains in North Africa. If this highly speculative theory holds up, it could link the manuscript's origin, or at least its subject matter, to the Morocco-Algeria region, or perhaps knowledge derived from there.
Wow, that would add an entirely new geographical dimension to the puzzle, moving it away from Central Europe.
It would indeed. But again, it's highly speculative, based on interpreting abstract diagrams as geological features. Just another tantalizing possibility in the Voynich enigma. #tagoutro.
So, wrapping this up, this deep dive has really shown us the extremes of ancient layered mystery, hasn't it? On one hand, you've got the global scale of Peru's geoglyphs.
Right.
These massive markings, visible really only from the sky. The material, the age, that's pretty clear now. But the purpose, the why, still lost to time. The complexity there lies mostly in the intention.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then, on the complete other hand, you have the Voynich Manuscript, an intense, almost microscopic complexity packed into one object. Here we know the materials pretty well, the inks, the age. But the meaning is locked behind what appears to be this deliberately constructed, multi-layered system of symbols and images. The complexity lies in the very architecture of the secrecy itself.
And I think the unifying challenge with the Voynich manuscript, as you've laid out, is precisely that it defies easy categorization. It's not just one thing, is it?
No, it really isn't. It seems to demand this interdisciplinary effort, merging linguistics, statistics, art history, codicology, paleography, cryptography, because it looks like this complex blend of, well, maybe architecture, cipher, shorthand, and some unknown natural language.
All mixed together.
All mixed together and created during a time, that 15th century, when, as we said, the boundaries between all those intellectual specializations were just far muddier, much more fluid than they are today. An alchemist could also be a cryptographer and a botanist.
That makes sense.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, maybe looking forward to the future of decipherment, We see this fascinating tension now between human intuition and, well, computational brute force.
AI versus the human brain.
Kind of. Today, artificial intelligence, like the large language models we hear about, still struggles. We've seen examples where AI models have tried, sometimes hallucinating facts or making connections that don't hold up, failing to crack the text in a truly satisfying, verifiable way.
Right. The stats confirm it's meaningful, but not what it means.
Exactly. Statistical analysis, often AI-driven, confirms that the text is meaningful, structured language code. But identifying the specific language and the specific cipher system remains elusive for current AI.
So what does this all mean for the ultimate fate of the Voynich Manuscript? Will it remain a mystery forever?
Well, the current generation of AI has confirmed that the text is meaningful, but it hasn't told us what it means.
Yeah.
However, the predictions circulating among some researchers, some technologists, is that a descendant or maybe a future rival of today's large language models? Perhaps a future iteration of something like ChatGPT, but maybe built more specifically for complex pattern recognition across obscure languages and diverse cipher structures, might finally decipher the Voynich manuscript within the next decade.
Within 10 years. Solved by a machine.
It's a possibility. If that happens, this 600-year-old riddle would be solved not necessarily by a historian poring over vellum with a magnifying glass, but by a computational system applying layers of statistical analysis and pattern matching far beyond human capacity.
That would be something. But wouldn't it almost take the romance out of it?
Maybe. But the mystery might then just shift, wouldn't it? It would shift entirely from what the book says to why. Why did its 15th century author or authors feel the need to encrypt what might be a relatively ordinary herbal or health manual so intricately, using such a complex multi-layered system in the first place? Who were they hiding it from, and why go to such extraordinary lengths? That becomes the new question.
Huh. A secret revealed only to create a deeper one about human intention.
Exactly. The code might be broken, but the human puzzle remains.
A perfect place to leave it. Thank you for diving deep with us into these incredible mysteries. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.